A hiker found a phone recording. The last minute, he found the phone just before dusk on a switchback above Blue Lake in the San Juan Mountains of southwest Colorado. It lay half buried in scree, face up, a spiderweb crack stitched across the glass, the red record dot stubbornly pulsing as if the device itself refused to look away from whatever it had heard. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The hiker's name was Ansel Rook, 33, a lineman from Pueblo who spent his days climbing utility poles and his weekends climbing whatever rose higher than his weekdays dared. It was late September 2021. The sky had that high-altitude rinse of cobalt that makes evergreen needles look sharper than they are. Below him, the water in the lake caught the last light and held it like a breath. Above him, a line of weather gathered beyond the ridgeline, thin-boned at first, then thickening into something like intention. Ansel lifted the phone with 2 fingers, the way you lift a bird that might be stunned but alive. The recording timestamp read 4:57 p.m. The battery icon showed 2%, then 1. He hesitated. The screen was smeared with a comma of dirt, the kind that comes from a palm skidding along gravel. He did not press play right away. He looked around first, because that is what you do when you find a thing that wants to tell you a story. You make room for it by seeing the place where the story happened. The switchback clung to an outthrust of talus and alpine grass, long blades moving in a wind that never quite became a gust. A cairn stood a little off the trail, too tidy to be natural, too thoughtful to be a prank. 2 boot prints were pressed into a patch of damp earth near the cairn, heel then toe, the kind of prints that happen when someone stops and leans forward for a better look at something that never asked to be looked at. Beyond that, the slope fell away into a tumble of shale and broken quartzite, a gray throat that could swallow a person without even needing to clear its own voice. He pressed play. First came footsteps, soft, measured, the sound of trail shoes finding their way over loose stone. Then, wind, not a roar, but a long vowel. A woman's breath, a zipper. The little chirp of a trekking pole knocking against a rock, and then being caught, steadied, forgiven. A far-off raven called once. Then, once again. The recording clipped and crackled, and then let the sound in wider, as if the phone had been lifted from a pocket. The woman's voice arrived next, not speaking to the phone, not to herself exactly, but to the place. Almost there, she said, and even in 2 words there was a smile you could hear. Another voice came in, thinner with distance, male, from above or beyond a switchback. Ansel could not see from his spot. Don't cut the corner. The tone was teasing, not scolding. It carried the kind of affection that worries by pretending not to. I know, the woman answered, and you could hear the grin get wider, as if she liked being told a rule she had already decided to follow. Ansel glanced up the trail, no silhouettes against the ridge, no packs leaning against a crumhole spruce, no motion that would explain a pair becoming 0. On the recording, the footsteps paused, the little metallic skr of a carabiner, a soft hum, tuneless and content, then a small sound that was not content at all. A pebble moving in a way pebbles do not choose for themselves, a slide that was also a decision. Hey, the man's voice said, quick now, and closer, and then there was skin and throat panic wrapped in one word, wait. The breath on the audio sped up, a severe silence followed, a silence full of edges, the way silence gets when it is about to be broken by something you cannot rewind. Then a single sound Ansel would think about later and later and later, a thump like a hand slapping the top of a piano closed. A gasp that turned into a half laugh, because sometimes the body does not admit the truth on the first try. A scrabbling, nails on stone, the phone fell or was dropped. The microphone scraped against the ground and filled the world with sand. Voices blurred, a name rose up out of the grit. Junia. The word was carried like a prayer someone forgot how to finish. More sliding. A shout that stopped without a period, a sound like a pack hitting and then being dragged, then only wind. Wind and the long, small sparrow of a cry that arrived uninvited from very far down, which might have been a person and might have been granite learning how to speak. The recording ended because the battery couldn't pretend any longer. Ansel stood very still, the phone warm now in his hand, the way a telling is warm the second time through. He tried the word on his own tongue. Junia. He looked where the two boot prints ended and where the ground began to pretend it was a floor but wasn't. He approached the cairn and hated it for existing and thanked it for marking the spot all at once. He kneeled and saw the narrow, scraped shine a person leaves when their boot finds a path no one built for it. The first drops hit his neck. Big, impatient, high country drops that are not water at all, but announcements. He lit his headlamp early, not because he needed it, but because a cone of light sometimes manages the world better than a wide, honest dark. He pulled an orange bandana from his pocket and tied it to the cairn. He took 3 photos in a slow circle: ground, slope, lake, and the way the sky had folded its arms. Then he did the most useful thing he knew. He climbed down to cell range. The call to the San Juan County Sheriff rang once, twice, and then a voice that had said this greeting more times than it wanted to answered with a name Ansel would remember. Deputy Cale Morrow. Calm. Not bored. Ready. Ansel described it carefully. Coordinates from his handheld GPS, the audio, the voices, the shape the trail made where it almost shook hands with the slope and then thought better of it, the bandana, the weather, rumored by the sky. Stay off the fall line, Morrow said. Get back to Timberline if you can and wait for search and rescue to reach you. Do not go after anyone you cannot see. He breathed in a way that made the phone sound like a lung. We've had a call about a late return from the Blue Lake Spur today. Your timing is not unlucky. It is the clock we were already watching. Ansel did as he was told. He descended to the last stand of wind-shaved spruce and waited, the kind of waiting that hums through bone. He could hear the storm organize itself on the ridge. He could feel how the mountains wear weather like a mood, quickly, convincingly, and then change it without apologizing. Headlamps appeared in the first gray of evening, a cluster of steady stars moving with purpose. 4 figures and a 5th slighter one moving with the confidence of a person who knows where the rocks are even when the rocks won't tell you. The 5th lifted a hand. Her hood was down despite the wind. Her hair was braided tight to keep the night from borrowing it. I'm Dory Keene, she said. San Juan Search and Rescue. This is Micah, Jovan, Arthur, and Ren. You the caller. Ansel nodded and gave them the phone. Dory turned the volume up and held the device near her ear, head bent, eyes closing in that way people have when they magnify one sense by dimming the rest. The others listened too, the small team suddenly one organism. When the man said wait, their spines stilled. When the name rose, Dory's mouth pressed flat, not cold, not warm. Deciding. She handed the phone back and pointed. Show me. They climbed in a line, the kind of line that knows which stones you can trust and which pretend to be trustworthy. The cairn found them. The bandana shivered in its small way. Dory crouched, laid 2 fingers on the scraped shine, and read it the way some people read Braille, asking for permission first. She looked down the slope, her eyes adjusted to a grammar Ansel did not speak. We anchor here, she said. 2 down to the first ledge, 2 on belay, Ren with me at the lip. You, Ansel Rook, you stay with Ren. If I tell you to move left, you move left. He swallowed, which tasted like metal, and nodded. The first thunder spoke. Not near, not far. The polite cousin of a threat. Rope hissed through gloves. Metal clinked with the bright sound mountain metal makes, a sound that knows at least 3 languages and prefers the most precise. Dory called down softly and answered herself when the wind was too busy to carry voices back up. 30 minutes grows very large when you cannot spend it on your own terms. The storm ignored them and then considered them and then walked away to another valley. The sky tried on a paler blue for a minute to see if it fit. Ansel watched a chipmunk watch them with the same fascination he felt. The animal had the kind of confidence that comes from being very good at running from everything. A shout made of 2 syllables rose from below, triumphant and careful at once. Got one? Dory closed her eyes for just long enough to speak without words to whatever listens up there. Then she called back. Name. Micah's voice floated up, thinner than it should have been. Junia. Alive. The sound inside Ansel's chest became something he had not realized he was holding back. He breathed it out in one steady line and leaned both palms into the earth, because you should always touch what keeps you from falling. They worked then. A litter arrived in pieces on shoulders and came together like an idea that had been there all along. Hands did what hands should do when someone needs to be lifted from one kind of gravity into another. They spoke to the person on the ledge in short lines, the way you speak to a horse you love and do not want to spook. Junia, we have you. Junia, do you feel this? Junia, breathe in when I count to 3. We're moving on, nowhere but up. Rain made a sentence across the slope and then erased it again. The wind forgot itself and then remembered. A raven rode the air as if it had invented it. Ansel saw her when they came over the lip. She had the look of someone who had been negotiating with Stone and won, but did not yet dare to celebrate. Mid-30s maybe, hair the color of straw left in the sun, eyes that wanted to close and would not. Blood dried in a tidy line along her left temple. The right knee of her hiking pants was torn, and beneath it, angry purple began to write its name. A bracelet made of 2 woven cords circled her wrist, one blue, one green. The blue was frayed, as if teeth had once worried it during a long night. She looked at Ansel first, not because of anything he had done, but because his face was the closest one when the world came back into focus. Her voice was rough from cold and prayer. Did you hear it? Did you hear me call him? He did not know who him was, and it did not matter. Yes, he said, as if yes were a kind of bandage. We heard you. We came. They moved her in the neat, practiced way people move someone who is more precious than anything else in the room. The rope line looked like music from a distance. The lightning threatened to tune its instruments and then decided not to play. The litter found the shadow of the pines and then the steeper shadow of the trail through meadow. 2 miles became an hour. The trail had arrived with the small surprise a finish line always carries. A white truck from the county waited, engine narrating its own faithfulness. A paramedic named Orrin Hux set hands on Junia with the kind of competence that makes even pain look smaller around the edges. He asked her name to ask her other things. Junia Ridge, she said. 35. From Albuquerque. Came up yesterday. Intended to camp. Yes, I was with someone. He was up the switchback. It was our second turn around the lake. That's his phone. She watched Ansel put the device into Orrin's outstretched palm and then closed her eyes because the world was too heavy to carry all the way open. Orrin asked the question that had to be asked. Where is he? Junia shook her head once, a small, broken metronome. I don't know. I slipped. He yelled. I caught the ledge. I don't know. Dory stood with her back to the truck and looked up at the ridge. Even from the trailhead, she could read the day along the stone. She spoke into the radio with the language that belongs to people who need updates to be short and full, second subject unaccounted, male voice on recovered audio, last known above Blue Lake Switchback 2, weather marginal, lightning east. Request second team from Telluride side if available, plus 1 dog on dawn, copy. It was full dark when the second team arrived. Headlamps stitched the slope like fireflies, convinced they were surgeons. The dog named Palace, coat black as a charcoal drawing that had learned to move, took the scent from a hat Junia had kept tucked under her hip belt. The dog read the ground like an old friend's letter. Up to the cairn, left where the trail pretends it is a suggestion. Down 3 shelves of stone, some people would call cliffs, and other people would call arguments. Then the animal stopped, sat, whined once, and put its chin on its paws. They found nothing that night. Not nothing in that cruel sense, but nothing you could put your hands on and say this belongs to him. No pack, no trekking pole, no hat. No snack wrapper with a name in tidy black letters like a first day of school. The mountain held its tongue. Morning came with a sky made of tin and apology. They went again, Palace worked again, Wren set anchors again. Micah called in a voice that refused to become thin. Ansel was sent home, because there is a point where more bodies become less help. He drove south toward Durango, the road curling along the Animas River, cottonwoods just beginning to try on their gold. He listened to the recording once more in the motel parking lot, sitting very still, as if any motion would knock truth out of the speakers. Junia woke in a bed that had rails and numbers and beeps. Two things lived in her body now: pain and the certainty that she had not imagined the second voice. The nurse wrote her name on a whiteboard that greeted morning patients like a cheerful aunt. Junia. The day. The plan. The surgeon's name with its syllables arranged like fence posts. Deputy Kale Morrow came in late morning. He had the kind of careful that does not pretend it isn't careful. He set a small gray recorder on the tray table with the gelatin cup and did not move it closer to her as if it were a burden. He asked permission. She nodded. He asked again, because some nods do not mean yes. She said yes. He pressed the button and spoke the words aloud the way people do when they want to make the world behave. Interview with Junia Ridge. Date, time, present, she told him. The way the weather had looked all day like a bluff, and how bluffs tired themselves out eventually. The man she had met at the trailhead that morning when she realized she'd left her stove fuel on the driver's seat back in town, and he had said without flinching, "I have more than I need, take mine." His name was Orrin Bale. Not a common name, which helped the telling and hurt the hurt. He was 39, maybe 40. He had the kind of smile that makes coffee taste the way it ought to. He had the kind of pace that lets conversation sit down and stay a while. He had his sister's dog and a photo on his phone, and had not tried to pretend it was his own. He had said it was his first time above 12,000 feet since he was a boy, and that the air was thinner, but his head felt clearer, and wasn't that funny. She had not planned to hike with him. They had both headed out early to beat the thunderheads that never quite decided to arrive. They crossed the first creek together because rocks are often friendships in disguise. They turned at the little waterfall, then again where the climb gets greedy. Somewhere near noon, they split. He to the saddle above the lake to look for ptarmigan, she to the outcrop on the western side where the blue looks bottomless and makes you feel the size of your own heartbeat. They regrouped by accident among a stand of willows that kept the wind in its coat. They ate together because food tastes better when someone else laughs at your almonds for being aspirational and you laugh at their gummy bears for being perfect. He offered the second loop around the lake, and she said yes, because saying yes is sometimes a way of agreeing with the day. And then the fall. And then the seconds that were longer than seconds. The name she tried to lace to him as if names were rope. The way the ledge held and then complained and then held again. The fact that there had been no shout that sounded like pain, only a shout that sounded like surprise, and then a long conversation between gravity and silence that ended with silence believing it had won. Kale listened the way people listen when they use listening as a tool. He did not say, "I am sorry," in the first 5 minutes, because sometimes sorry has to wait its turn behind words that can anchor an actual investigation. He asked for a description that could be drawn into a cruiser laptop sketch. He asked for the brand of the pack, the color of the jacket, the kind of hat. He asked if Orrin had a habit of humming, joking, leaning to his left when he walked. Junia closed her eyes and watched the man step through the room her mind made of the trail. He hummed, she said finally, low, tuneless, when he tried to put a word to a story he had not told yet. He leaned into weather, as if weather liked people who leaned back. They searched 3 days. Helicopter on day 2, when the wind played nice, no body, no sign. The slope did what slopes do. It took the small and offered back the smaller, a strap end. A pocket knife that might have belonged to anyone. A grin of metal that once was a grommet. Nothing that knew how to clap its hands and say, mine. The internet made its murmurs the way it does. The forums filled with conjecture. The ones who have never been above treeline explain to the ones who have exactly how Talus works. A post from a cousin arrived in the kind of font grief chooses when it has to choose one. Have you seen him? Another from a person who knew a person who might have known him and wrote that he was the kind of man who never took the last donut. A stranger said, why was she with him at all, as if who walks beside you guarantees you a ladder back down. Dory Keene did not read the forums. She read the mountain. On day 4, she told Kale in a voice that allowed both compassion and math that if the slope had decided to keep him, it likely would continue to keep him until snow learned what it wanted to do and then taught them in spring. Cale nodded, his jaw set lazy and hard, the way the river sets a stone down and then decides where it lives. Junia went home to Albuquerque with stitches like commas along her hairline and a knee wrapped in instructions. She slept 4 nights without the part of sleep that heals. On the 5th night, she dreamed of blue water that did not know it was cold, and a voice saying, "Wait," in a tone of gentle impatience, as if wait were a surprise party she would like if she would just stop walking long enough to see the lights. Come on. Ansel went back to work. Poles. Wire. The logic of circuits. He found himself stopping on the shoulders of county roads to watch clouds interrogate a ridge and answer themselves with rain. He listened to the recording once more, then deleted it because a voice should be treated like a person's glove. Pick it up only if it is yours or if the person who wore it has asked you to hand it back. The snow came in late October, the way it comes in the San Juans, when it decides to be industrious. It buried the slopes grammar, it set down the season like a book a child might not be ready for. Thanksgiving arrived with a turkey that somebody had to carve whether they wanted to or not. December wrote its short letters, and January forgot to put a return address on anything. In early June of the next year, when the snowpack loosened its jaw, 2 things happened on the same day. At 11:19 in the morning, a pair of hikers from Montrose came down from the saddle above Blue Lake early because the sun had made everything overconfident and the heat on the rock had learned to be a lie. They paused near the outthrust of Talus, where a cairn had once worn an orange bandana and now wore nothing but its own small pride. A zipper glinted among the stones. The zipper was attached to a jacket the color of fog. The jacket was wrapped around the idea of a man. They did what the poster in the ranger station says to do when a finding stops being a finding and becomes a person. Mark the spot. Note the time. Back away in the exact steps you made arriving. Carry more silence than usually carry. Call. The second thing that happened at 1:27 in the afternoon occurred in a backyard in Albuquerque where the cottonwood shed its soft snow over a patch of lawn that wanted more water than the city wanted to give it. Junia's phone chimed. She looked down, thinking it would be the alert she still had not turned off for the county updates. Instead, there was a text from a number she had written down on a napkin and saved on purpose. It said only this: "We found him. Dory." Junia sat on the back steps and watched 3 ants perform a task more complicated than any she had been assigned that week. She did not cry because they had prepared her politely not to expect this. She did not smile because smiling was a verb her face had not practiced with that sentence. She pressed call and heard a voice that wore dust and care. Dory told her what could be told on a phone and promised the rest would be told face to face, because some tellings don't belong to towers and waves. A week later, Junia drove north, past Espanola, where the signs know 2 languages, past Abiquiu, where the river looks like it can't help but gather light, over the state line, that is a thought and a mile marker and a map all at once, into the San Juans, where the air remembers your first name and uses it. Dory met her at the small office with the big map and 2 chairs that had learned to carry tired people. Cale was there too. He set a folder on the table and did not open it until her hands rested on her knees, the way you rest a cup on a saucer. "We recovered MrBallen," he said, and the word recovered did not feel like anything except exactly itself. 2 hikers saw the jacket. He left the trail at the switchback, slipped on the lip, and fell more than 30 feet to a shelf. The shelf kept him for winter. He likely died on impact. No signs of anything except the mountain doing what mountains do when you ask them to hold a human being. The autopsy says the thing autopsies say when physics chooses the verbs. She asked the question that had been living in her since the voice said, "Wait, did he speak after I slipped?" We can't say, Cale said. And then because the truth deserved a little mercy, he added, "The shelf where we found him was below your ledge, not above it." Which means his voice on the recording was in the seconds before you both stopped standing and started falling. After that, he would have been below you. If you don't remember hearing him then, that is your brain giving you a gift it knew you could not buy for yourself yet. Dory laid something on the table wrapped in a brown paper lunch bag. "We think this is yours," she said. We found it lodged in a crack just above where you came to rest. It had become part of the mountain, but it was stubborn in a way that listened. Junia unwrapped the thing, the bracelet from her wrist. The blue and green cords had become one color winter makes. The frayed end had been burnt to keep the braid from unraveling and then worn down again by time. She turned it in her hand, thumb finding the place where the weave had learned her skin and made it a home. He gave me this at the trailhead, she said. He said he made 2 of them when he decided to stop drinking 3 years ago. He kept the green, he wore it under his watch. He gave me the blue because I said I had stopped apologizing for being careful the year before, and he laughed and said, "That sounds like a thing worth marking." We only knew each other a handful of hours, and yet, she closed her fingers, then opened them again. Ansel Rook sent me the audio file. Did you know that? He asked if it would help. I said yes before I knew the answer. It did not help, and it did. Both are true. They stood later at the trailhead. The mountains looked less like authorities and more like the long, patient elders they are. A breeze moved through the spruce in a way that would be mistaken for whispering if you were the kind of person who liked to be mistaken that way. Junia closed her eyes and saw the shelf she had not seen. She said his name once out loud and not loud, the syllables answered by not answering at all. They buried Orrin Bale in a small cemetery behind a church that had learned to be ecumenical because the weather didn't care which god you favored. His sister came with the dog whose photo he had shown. She spoke without paper, which meant her mouth borrowed words from the heart, and the heart forgave the mouth for not being tidier. Junia stood 2 rows back and pressed her fingers into the bracelet and found she did not have to press very hard to feel the world answer. Ansel did not come to the service because attendance is sometimes not the right way to honor a stranger you helped. He drove a route that took him past a ridgeline and paused in the pullout that locals use because it's theirs. He left his truck idling. He rolled the window down. A meadowlark said something with conviction and melody. He answered, "I hear you," and meant it. As summer leaned hard into itself, tourists thinned the trails with their curiosity and filled the cafes with their hunger. The blue of Blue Lake looked less like an opinion and more like proof. Dory kept her team on the same frequency, even on days when no one needed rescuing, because habit saves more lives than heroics. Cale kept notches in his days for the kind of paperwork no show has ever made look interesting. It was work. It mattered that it was work. Years later, in a living room in Santa Fe, Junia would set a phone on a table between 2 mugs and play the last minute for a friend who asked very gently to hear it. The friend would listen with eyes open because some listenings deserve witness. In that small recording lived a hill, a sky, a woman, a man, a word made of 4 letters in air, and a sort of silence you learn to share with people you trust. When it ended, they would sit still long enough that the room would remember they were there and offer them back their voices. "What do you make of it?" the friend would ask, not to argue, just to let the world have one more chance to tell her what it thinks it is. That he said, "Wait," Junia would answer, and meant it kindly. That I said "almost there," and meant it with all my heart. That the mountain was not a villain and not a friend. That the cliff listened and then did what cliffs do. That the phone fell the way a witness sometimes falls and still did its job. That people who did not know me put a rope on and let me become part of their workday. That the second voice is a place in my head now where something can live without having to die again. She would hold up her wrist. The bracelet would have been replaced by another that looked very much like it and not at all like it, blue and green, new knots, same story. She would say, "I tell the mountains out loud now when I turn around." I say, "See, this is me deciding to see you again." And sometimes the wind says nothing back, and sometimes it says a sound that is not a word and still feels like one. Here is what does not always fit in the write-up. The last minute of a recording can keep playing long after the file ends. The man's wait can become a way to step out of traffic, to carry a ladder with a friend, to hold a door without trying to become the door. The woman's almost there can become a way to measure a good day, not by miles, but by a turn you made toward kindness when no one was checking your odometer. If you go to the San Juans, and I hope you do, look up. Say the names of the peaks, like they are elders you respect. Tell the sky you will be back before it begins to think about electricity. Pack a bandana, a bright color that could be seen from far away by a stranger who might need a small flag to make a big decision. If you find a cairn, leave it be unless a ranger told you otherwise. If you find a phone, do what Ansel did. Press play only after you have looked around. Then, if you must, listen. Hear the footsteps, the wind, the breath. The word that might be a prayer and might be a joke and might be both. Decide carefully what you will do with the minute you have been given. It will be late somewhere by the time you finish this. It will be early somewhere else. The country is wide and the mountains are quiet, and the phones we carry don't always know when to stop telling the truth. If tonight you hear the wind make a sound that asks you to wait, take one step back from the edge and put your hand on your own shoulder the way a good friend would. If tomorrow your trail offers you a second loop, say yes or no out loud so the day can hear you and keep its promise not to argue. And if the last minute ever finds you the way it found Ansel, at the exact space where listening became a kind of work, let your voice be the one that says, "We hear you, we're coming, then come." The babysitter heard a voice, "Don't answer the door." The first knock came at 8:53 on a rain-polished Saturday in late October, the kind of night in Portland, Oregon, when sidewalks shine and porches feel closer to the river. The house on Birch Hollow Court sat half a block from a small park that still carried the day's damp laughter. Inside, the dishwasher murmured, and a kettle tried to be brave. The babysitter stood in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame, listening because something in the sound at the front of the house asked to be listened to. The knock was polite, then it wasn't. "Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there?" Her name was Isola Marin, 19. Art student, commuter, weeknight sitter for families who liked the way she paid attention. She had a way of noticing and then not needing to say what she had noticed. 2 children slept upstairs in rooms that smelled like clean cotton and a little of crayons. Oren, 5, a collector of sticks, and Juniper, 3, a thumbsucker who dreamed with her hands still resting on the bed rail as if the world might roll. Their parents, Elowin and Cormac Pike, had left at 7:15 for a long-promised dinner with friends on the east side. The year was 2016, when doorbells had learned to film you and phones hummed even when you wished them quiet. Isola had arrived early because she liked the first hour best when the house met you and you met it. The Pike's place had bones from the 1930s and confidence from a do-it-yourself remodel. A deep porch with a swing, pine floors that told the truth when the humidity rose, a narrow staircase that gave out a soft warning at the third tread. The front door had a knob smooth with history and a deadbolt that made a good, finished sound. Someone had left a bowl of apples on the kitchen island and a note in Elowin's looping hand, "Help yourself to anything except the chocolate chips." The note had a smile drawn like a quick breeze. There was also a line at the bottom that felt like it had been added while standing up. "If someone knocks and we're not back yet, don't answer." That line had made Isola breathe out through her nose, amused. Then the weather settled in, and the streetlight outside made the rain look like it had purpose, and she read the line again without amusement and put it into the pocket in her mind where she kept instructions that were probably not overcautious. The first knock came, then the doorbell. The chime had been replaced during the remodel and sounded like an idea of a doorbell rather than a doorbell itself. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola glanced at the hallway. The front camera should have sent her phone a picture, but her phone sat face down on the counter as an experiment in being a better person. She lifted it. No alert. No snapshot of a porch visitor wet with evening. She opened the app anyway. The screen showed a frozen image from 2 hours ago when the delivery driver in a yellow slicker had left a cardboard box and made a joke to the camera about swimming away. She touched the screen to wake it. It refused. The second knock came, not loud, but certain. She heard a hush behind the sound, no traffic for that moment, no neighbor's laugh, the rain taking a breath. "Coming!" she called, and heard the word bounce off the door and regret its volume. She crossed the living room, passing the lamp with the heavy base and the stack of picture books Elowin had left, lined up for bedtime like a plan that had already succeeded. She stopped 3 steps from the door, where you can still see the whole threshold and also the 3 framed photos on the wall to the right: Pike family on the Oregon coast, Pike family at a pumpkin patch, Pike family on a couch in this very room, elbows touching. The peephole showed dark. Not the dark of a coat, too close. The dark of rain pressuring the lens. She tilted her head to the side window, the one with the glass etched in a pattern of leaves. A shape stood on the porch, too close to see contours. Tall enough to be adult. Still, she thought of families who send a neighbor to drop off a sweater, of packages misdelivered, of jokes. She reached up, fingers on the deadbolt, and then the voice came from the stairwell behind her, even and close, a whisper and not a whisper, a way of speaking that used the room more than it used the air. Don't answer the door. Isola stopped moving. The words had come from the landing, or the old heating vent in the hall, or the part of a house where stair and wall meet and decide to be patient. She turned her head, slow, like a deer deciding whether the sound belongs to a creek or to a person who has forgotten how feet work. No one stood there. Only the line of light from the kitchen, a run of framed children's drawings on the stair wall, and the slight turn of the banister at the top where a hand likes to pause. "Hello," she said, not loud, not questioning, simply acknowledging the world's habit of speaking up when you have one hand on a lock. Down the hall, the nightlight in Oren's room painted a small boat shape on the floor. She took her hand off the deadbolt. On the porch, the shape shifted its weight. The doorbell chimed again, 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola's phone remained stubbornly uninterested. She felt her scalp fizz, as if the body were sprinkling sugar there. She stepped back 1 foot, then another, until the space between her and the door felt like a sentence with the right number of commas. She set the phone on the entry table and kept her eyes on the door. The shape did not knock again. "Can I help you?" she called, calm. "The owners aren't home." The shape made no answer. The rain decided to be louder for a few seconds, then took its apology and softened. A car passed at the end of the block, and its tires whispered on wet asphalt, then left them again. The shape did not say, "Leave this," or "I'm lost," or "Wrong address." It did not step down the stairs or shift toward the window to try a too close look. It stood. The voice from the stairs came again, almost the same, the almost important. "Don't answer ISO." No one called her ISO except 2 people who were not in this house. Not even Elowen, who preferred full names like a teacher who still missed a chalkboard. The nickname arrived and held. The quiet around it learned how to be heavier. Isola is not the kind of person who does brave for style. She does careful as choreography. She picked up the heavy flashlight from the umbrella stand and felt the weight in her fingers like a vote. She walked backward into the living room, never turning her back to the door until the couch was behind her knees. Then she set the flashlight on its end on the coffee table, ready to throw its beam like a purposeful animal. She tapped the phone awake. Now the camera app sent an alert, but when she opened it, the image from the porch was empty but for rain. A rain curtain, the edge of the porch railing. No shape, no wet footprints on the mat when she zoomed, though that could be the grain of the old wood lying. The house held itself very still. Oren coughed once upstairs and rolled to a new dream. The dishwasher hit its dry cycle and made a small whir, as if about to tell a joke. Isola stood. She walked to the staircase and put her hand on the newel post because sometimes wood is better than a person's breath. She stepped up the first 3 treads, the third giving its soft warning, and peered down the hall. Juniper's door was open, just enough for night to move through. Oren's was open a little wider because he had insisted, recently, that he could hear better if the door learned to be brave, and no one had argued with the logic. "Thank you," she said to the landing. She felt ridiculous. She felt correct. The phone hummed. A text from Cormac, "Running late, dessert took forever. You good?" She typed, "Yes." All quiet. Then after a second, a person knocked. Didn't answer. "All good." He bubbled back a thumbs up and a "let me know if weird." She did not type the lines she could not yet shape. She put the phone in her back pocket and went to the kitchen kettle. Tea might give the house another language to speak in. At 9:11, the sound came again. Not the knock. The dry slide of weight on porch boards, Then a new voice, not in the room and not in the rain, a man's voice on the other side of the door, pitched to be reassuring and succeeding halfway. "Hey there," it called. "Sorry to bug you. My car slid a bit. I'm fine, just could I borrow a phone charger? Mine died." Isola stood very still on the tile by the stove. Charged phones. The sentence wore a coat of sense. It also wore the same coat a story uses when it wants to be invited inside. She felt the stare voice rest itself like a hand just between her shoulders. "Don't answer. I can call a tow from here," she said. "If you tell me your name and plate, I'll call it in." A beat. The rain breathed. A neighbor's porch light clicked on 2 doors down, as if someone there had a similar feeling that night, should know it was being watched. "Sure," the voice said, cheerful, hurried. "Yeah, okay, appreciate it. I'm Kai. Plate is Washington, ZNJ." He trailed. The sound changed as if he had turned his head, as if reading something off a thing that had decided not to help him. "Hold up. Hard to see in the rain." "Okay," Isola said. She took a pen from the junk drawer. She did not step toward the door. The voice did not finish. The porch boards did the shift sound again, the one a body makes when deciding to step down, then silence, which is a choice. She waited a full minute and then padded back to the front hall, one foot making no more sound than the idea of a foot. Through the etched glass, she could see only the suggestion of a person-shaped absence where rain fell differently. The porch swing moved a breath back and forth, though she had not seen it move before tonight. She put her ear near the wood and did that thing you do against doors you don't mean to open. She listened to the hinge. She heard air. She did not hear breathing. She backed away because she did not owe the door any of the parts of her face. At 9:27, the voice from the stairs came a third time, and now it had a softness that made her throat ache. "Don't answer the door, Isola." "Okay," she said, and laughed once, not unkind. "Okay." She called the non-emergency line. The operator's voice was brisk, then kinder when she heard the children's ages. They sent a patrol car to cruise Birch Hollow Court. The officer rolled slow under the maples, touched 2 fingers to his brim up toward the windows like old practice, then slid away toward the park. He called to tell her he'd found no car in distress, no one walking in rain. She thanked him the way a person thanks another for being willing to be seen doing their job. At 10:09, something touched the back door. Not a knock, the whisper sound of a finger on glass. Isola turned off the kitchen light and let the room become a place where her eyes could do their best work. She stood behind the island and let one breath out, as if teaching her ribs a rule. The finger on glass again. Scrape, gentle. A child in some houses might do that, playing ambush. But the child would laugh or give himself away with breath fogging the pain in a haunted oval. The voice in the hall didn't speak. It didn't need to. Isola aimed the flashlight at the floorboards and thumbed it on. The beam carved a clean white lane across the tile and into the mudroom, up onto the window, where a skin of condensation wavered on the glass like a thought. No face waited beyond it, only the moon in its nearly new mood, and the reflection of her own shoulder shaping into something braver than she felt. The scrape came again. The flashlight beam caught the faintest arc at the level of a hand. She walked a half step closer and saw what had made it. On the outside of the glass, pressed lightly against the pane as if placed, and then hesitated and then not taken away, was a leaf. A maple leaf quilted with rain, stem hanging like a punctuation mark. It trembled and dragged and lifted free. That was all. By 10:45, the children were deep in the kind of sleep that makes a house feel like it has set down a heavy bag. Isola sat in the living room and read 3 pages of a book without hearing a word, then closed it and looked at the door again and felt foolish again for looking at a door. She texted Elowen, "No rush, all fine." Their reply came in a minute. "On our way, rain slow, be home around 11:15, and wore the sound of people who have begun putting coats on." At 11:19, as headlights turned the corner outside and rain slicked away from tires and the familiar shape of the Pikes' wagon slowed by the curb, the doorbell chimed a third time. 3 notes, the middle one shy. Isola stood in the hallway, hand on the deadbolt. and looked through the peephole. The porch was empty, the wagon door closed. Cormac ran up the steps in a coat wet enough to laugh at itself. He patted his pockets like a magician who had dropped something essential. He had not rung. The bell had decided to make a ceremony for him anyway. Elowyn kissed Isola's cheek in the open doorway and apologized to the knight for taking their time. Cormac did a father's walk down the hall to glance into his children's rooms, even though he had been told they were sleeping. Isola told them the short version. A knock, a voice asking for a charger, a patrol car that had been kind. The line on their note she had obeyed in a way that made the marrow in her wrist feel hot. Elowyn's mouth went still. Not hard, still. She looked toward the stairs like a person checking if water had been left running in an upstairs bathroom. "Thank you," she said. "I should have told you more about that line on the note. It felt like telling too much would make it silly, but I should have told you." "I heard a voice," Isola said, careful as she said it, ready to be believed, ready to be joked with. "From the landing. It told me not to answer. It knew my name." Elowyn closed her eyes and nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They made tea. Cormac sat on the arm of a chair like a man who cannot bend himself small enough to fit back into an ordinary evening. Elowyn told the story the way you tell one when you have lived with it long enough to know where its corners are. 2 winters before, she said, on a night when the river lifted itself and tried on a deeper voice, a man had walked the neighborhood knocking on doors asking for help. When people opened, he asked to come in and make a call, and if they stepped aside, he would cross the threshold with a speed that felt like another person had told him to hurry. Police had found him at the park pavilion where he had been sleeping rough, talking to a friend only he could hear. He never heard anyone, Elowyn said, but the nights after that felt like a door with a hard-to-find key. 2 weeks later, Cormac said, picking up the part he needed to say, "We were here with a sitter, not you, a college kid named Pike, no relation, and something similar happened. Knock. Voice." He started toward the door, and Juniper, who was barely 2, sat up and said clear as a broadcast, "Don't answer, Daddy." She was barely speaking in sentences. She said it right. My mother's voice used to say it to me when I would go to the door for anybody. Something about the way Junie said it. It sounded like my mother and not like my daughter, and also like my daughter anyway. I didn't open the door. We watched through the side glass. There was nobody there. The bell chimed again. "And then," Elowyn added, "last spring, when we were packing for a visit to my sister's, the doorbell chimed at 2:17 in the morning. Twice. Cormac checked. No one. Junie sat up and said it again. Don't answer the door. We changed the batteries in the chime. We changed the camera. We got smarter about being dumb. But the voice, it comes when it needs to. And she sleeps through it now. We hear it and we listen to it, and then we don't tell anyone because the world doesn't know what to do with a family in a sentence." They laughed softly, a release. The kettle sighed. Rain found a new tempo along the gutters. Isola told them about the man who had used the name Kai and about the way the shape had filled the porch and then been only Rain when she asked questions. She said the nickname the voice had used for her and watched Elowyn's face widen in a slow astonishment that contained no fear. "It knows," Elowyn said. "It knows who it needs to keep." They did not turn the story into an advertisement for another religion. They put the house back in order. Isola took the extra bills Cormac offered only after he insisted 3 times. She put on her jacket, damp from fear she didn't call fear, and stepped out onto the porch with them. The porch looked like any porch. The swing creaked because swings are built to do that, at least a little. The streetlight watched their car for a second, then got bored. Elowyn reached for Isola's hand and squeezed, once, like a benediction you don't have to keep. On the drive home, the wipers kept time for a song Isola wouldn't have recognized if it had been played for her on a better night. She went under the overpass, where a man with a shopping cart had built a small palace of pallets and hope. She went by the open all-night grocery, where the cashier sells soup to people whose apartments never learned to hold heat. She went by a block of houses where the windows showed families still awake and not sorry. At a red light, she lowered her window and let the rain reach all the way in and touch her cheek, and then she rolled it back up and laughed because the world had not insisted on being only one thing. The voice didn't follow her. It stayed with the house that needed it. Weeks went by without another knock at an odd hour. Leaves went to ground, and then to bags, and then to wherever leaves go when they've done their first job. On a Thursday in early December, Isola sat for another family across town and saw on the neighborhood chat a thread begin. Did anyone hear a bell twice last night around 2? The comments were predictable, then less so. A woman 4 streets over wrote that her grandmother used to leave a ribbon on the inside doorknob to remind herself not to open for kindness in the exact hour when kindness is most dangerous. A man who taught band at the high school wrote that he lived alone and still heard a voice sometimes when he put his hand on the deadbolt, and it always sounded like a person who had spent the afternoon organizing drawers and would simply not have the mess of a poor decision. Near midnight, her phone hummed. A text from Elowen, a photo of Juniper asleep on the couch under a quilt, toes poking out like arguments. Under it, a simple line. When she was half asleep tonight, she said, "Tell ISO thanks. The thanks is from me too." That winter, the door stayed a door. Spring arrived with a rhythm it was proud of. The voice came twice, each time for Isola, once at the Pike House, and once oddly in a different house where the rule felt the same though the picture frames were new. Don't answer. Each time she didn't. Each time the world failed to end. Each time she thought of how many doors in this country stand between people who need help and people who will offer it, and people who mean harm and the harm they intend. She learned something small and, to her, permanent. Safety and kindness are not enemies. They are a ladder. You step to the next rung when it will hold, not before. In late summer, after her semester ended and before the new one began, she took a train to see family in Eastern Washington. In the dining car, a man waved her to the empty seat across from him, the way travelers do when their stories want company, and she accepted. He was older, but not old, wore a ball cap with the logo torn off, and had one of those faces that make you feel remembered. He asked what she did. She said art and children and listening. He nodded as if that were a single profession. He told her he had been a night manager at a motel once, decades back, and how sometimes the night tells you who to open the door for and who to speak to through glass, and how your body knows if you let it be the first expert. He said his mother's voice still visited clear, not spooky, not the kind of thing you put in a movie, and told him the one sentence that she had left him as a tool: don't answer the door, not because you aren't good, because you are. She returned to Portland with a sketchbook full of stairways and kettles and porch swings. She babysat for the Pikes the first Friday of October, a night with dry leaves and a moon that put on a mustache of cloud and then laughed at itself. The bedtimes went easy. The dishwasher hummed. At 9:14, the bell chimed once and stopped. She walked to the door and put her hand on the newel post and waited. The voice did not come this time. The house trusted her to have learned. She didn't answer. Later, when Elowen got home and leaned against the door while she took her boots off and said, "I love my boots and I love taking them off," Isola told her about the single chime. Elowen laughed softly and asked if she wanted pie, and they ate pie in the kitchen with their spoons, making small civilized noises, and the night minding its business. If you want a moral, there isn't one sharp and neat enough to slice bread. There is a sentence that belongs to a particular house on Birch Hollow Court, and maybe to your house too if you need it. Don't answer the door. It doesn't mean never. It doesn't mean be a city made of fear. It means listen for the moment your body tells you the story the night is trying to sell, then say no with enough steadiness that the night has to take its pitch elsewhere. If you are ever in a quiet house with children sleeping like small planets upstairs, and the door learns a new trick with its hinge at a time of night when even helpful people forget how to stand, and you hear a voice that knows your name and the shape of your life, let it be a chain on the inside, not a chain on the world. Make tea. Call for help you trust. Stay in the room with the light. Thank the air when it warns you, even if the thanks feels ridiculous in your mouth. Names will still be names in the morning, doors will still be doors. And you will have kept the lesson the old houses know. Sometimes the kindest act is to hold still while the night tries your latch and finds it true. He found a staircase in the lake. It still goes up. He did not see the staircase until the wind laid the lake down flat, a high mountain stillness that came like a held breath. It was late afternoon on Fontana Lake in western North Carolina, where drowned hills wear water like a borrowed coat, and the concrete dam throws a cold shadow that teaches you to look twice. The drought had been long, stingy, the kind that draws shoreline back like a tide that lost faith. Ansel Rook, 39, a surveyor who liked boats better than offices, let his rented skiff idle and watched the pale slope of silt with its driftwood teeth. Then the light tipped, and a line of gray stone showed under the green, not random at all, steps as even as counted breaths, leading up from water toward nothing that should exist. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? That October, 2022, the Smokies stood sharp against a sky the color of rinsed linen. The air smelled of leaf duff and gasoline and the faraway tang of rain that was always a rumor this year and rarely a fact. Ansel had driven out from Bryson City after lunch with a paper cup of coffee and a coil of measuring tape because the county had asked for photos of exposed foundations along the North Shore. The maps they kept were honest but out of date, and the lake was telling different stories every week. He wore a windbreaker the color of old blueberries, a hat with a frayed bill, and the face of a man who does not mind being alone if the work has edges. He cut the motor and drifted. The steps began in green water a little deeper than a tall man's reach, the lake clear enough in that pocket to show the top 3 treads before light blurred into bottle glass. They continued above the surface, slick with algae at the line where water had been yesterday, then dry, then dusty, another dozen risers marching toward a slash of bank where saplings clawed at loose dirt. There was no porch, no house, no landing where a hand might reach for a knob, just a staircase that went up and then kept going as if the air were a hallway no one had told it how to be. Ansel nosed the bow toward the steps and let the skiff kiss the lowest dry riser. The hull made a hollow sound he heard in his knees. He stood, tested his balance, and stepped onto the first stone. It held. He took another. The risers were a hair shorter than modern code, built for legs from a different century. He climbed 10, then 11, then 12, a little more than a story, in a house that had learned to take weather as a sermon. He stopped where the steps met an absence and laid his hand on the sidewall that ran up either side like bones. Mortared fieldstone, careful work, the kind that starts with winter in mind. He looked back. The lake held his boat like a hand holds a toy. The dam stood off to the west, all angles and utility, its face unreadable. A loon called once far out, the syllable slanted and old. The stare made no answer, and that felt like an answer. He took out his phone. No signal, which is how stories get their chances. He knelt and ran his fingers over scrape marks in the treads where feet had once taught stone to be polite. He brushed silt from a riser with the cuff of his jacket and uncovered a line of letters someone had cut with a chisel and a spare hour. Willow Gap. The name felt right in the mouth. The steps had belonged to a place on a hillside that no longer agreed to exist. A truck rumbled on the scenic road above the tree line, then faded. Ansel stood. He is not a dramatic man, not a man who says the word haunted when the word history will do, but he felt a little movement in his scalp when his boot tried the next tread up and met nothing it could trust. He lifted his foot and set it again, and the soul found purchase on air as if stone continued in a material too stubborn for his eyes. He could feel something there, a resistance like the way a field of grass resists when you try to step through a place where deer have passed and the stems remember. He pressed. His weight held. He let it go and stepped back, heart knocking once, but not twice. He stood on the stair where real ended and whatever else began. The lake lapped below, measuring the hull against rock. A red maple leaf came down with dignity, landed on the 7th riser, and considered the long work of becoming loam. Ansel took a breath. He is a man who trusts second looks. He took one. The lake belonged to a body of stories people in Bryson City tell clean over pie. When the Tennessee Valley Authority flooded the valley to build the dam in the early 1940s, the town of Proctor had to move. Houses went down to foundations, barns left prints in the earth like giant hands, cemeteries were dug up with care and moved with ceremony, and some say not everything went where it should. On low years, people found stairs and walls, school steps, a chimney with a name carved into a corner stone. On foolish years, people tried to steal the past, and the mud stole them instead. The county kept a list of places not to be brave. Ansel is not brave. He is patient. He walked back down to the skiff and dug out the coil of tape, a pencil, a stack of flagging ribbon. He thought of calling the park office and decided instead to take his measurements first and be useful with facts. He worked the way surveyors work, lengths and levels, muttering figures under his breath in a rhythm that kept the mind from dramatizing. He wrote Willow Gap on a page and underlined it softly with the pencil because the stone had asked. He measured tread depth, rise, total run to the bank, distance to the current water line, the angle of the bank above the last step. While he worked, a wind came from the east and pushed the surface into a skin. The steps looked less sure then. He set a small cloth bag at the foot of the first dry riser, full of pebbles and a coil of bright ribbon, because people in the mountains know that small offerings are not foolish if they help you think straight. Halfway through, he heard a bicycle bell, clear, bright, a single ring. He straightened. The sound did not belong to a road. It had the roundness of a thing sounded in an open room. He turned his head the way animals do when they want to aim an ear. The bell came again, faint, then a child's voice without words, the way children announce themselves to their own day. The air held it and gave it back. Then nothing. He called out a simple hello. The sound folded into the trees and did not return. He is not the kind of man who says names into a lake, so he went back to his numbers and let the bell be a sound that remembered and moved on. At sunset, he drove back to town. He did not mention the staircase at the diner because new stories grow better if you give them a night to decide their shape. He took his notes to the tiny desk in his rental and drew the thing. He wrote in the margin a line that was not part of any job he had ever been paid to do. The stair goes up past stone. The next morning, the lake wore a fog that fell in slow exhalations from the coves. He put the skiff in early, coffee in a thermos that had learned to keep secrets. The staircase waited. He climbed to the place where his boot had found air the day before. He lifted his foot and pressed again and met the same soft resistance, like cloth pulled tight across a doorway. The fog gathered and thinned. The lake stretched one slow muscle. He set his palm out where a banister would be if someone had considered such things. His fingers tingled with the small current that passes through the body at the exact moment a man tells himself he will try something and believes himself. He raised his knee and stepped onto what was not there. The foot held. He set the other. He stood an inch above the last stone and felt a dizzy smile crawl across his face as if he had been younger once and forgotten how to be. He took another. The air had weight where the step ought to be. He felt it through the rubber of his boot, a density that said, I am not stone and I am not stone. He climbed 3 steps in air and stopped because he is not brave. Breath is a kind of data. He took it in. The fog thinned. The stair under nothing led to a landing that the mind made, whether or not the world did. He imagined a door where the sky was, just to see if the imagination would draw a knob. It did not. He stepped back, down onto the good stone, and laughed once, quietly, pointedly, the way you tell yourself you are still a person whose days have jobs in them. On the 3rd day, he brought someone. Ansel is careful about who he invites into something he cannot name. He called Lucienne Pike, 61, who ran the Little Historical Society in town with the energy of a river in March. She wore a quilted vest and a wool cap and the kind of boots women earn by living here. She brought pastries because facts get hungry and people are nicer when their hands are busy. She listened while he told it. She did not interrupt. She asked one question with her head tilted like a dog hearing a violin. Does it go up? It goes up, he said. They went out together. The skiff felt lightly ridiculous under the weight of their care. The morning did the few small things it always does before it remembers it is in charge. The staircase was there, gray in the light, patient as a broom left leaning against a wall you forgot to keep. Lucienne reached the second riser and stopped, and with an odd humility, put her palm to the wall so the stone might recognize her. She climbed to the place where Air had learned a job. He watched her foot commit and hold. She gave him a look he will carry to his last morning. It had the quiet of a person who has been right about something important or wrong about something important and is making room for either result. She climbed one more and stopped. She did not push. She is not greedy. She came back down. Back in town, she made them tea in the society's office, which smelled of paper and lemon oil. She opened a ledger that had belonged to a church over the ridge that no longer stood. She turned pages until the binding sighed and laid flat, and then she tapped a finger next to a line written in a hand that had cared very much about straightness. Willow Gap Homestead, Brysonside. Stair and porch built by M. Garvey, 1931. Stepstones gifted by Applin sisters. She traced the names like a kind of blessing. People give names so the ground will keep them without bitterness, she said. Ansel told her about the bicycle bell, about the child voice that had no words. She nodded once, an economy that could hold an encyclopedia behind it. They found a photo in a folder of houses drowned to make the dam, a woman in a light summer dress halfway up a stair with a baby at her hip, and a boy of about 6 sitting on the landing with a tin pail, watching the photographer with straight seriousness. The steps were the same, the wall the same, the angle of the hillside the same, the lake not yet there to argue. Lucienne tapped a pencil against the margin of the picture and said the thing that opened the room. My grandmother told me she saw the army men come to measure in 38. She said a man from Willow Gap told them he would build his stair to the sky if it meant the water would have to think twice. She said he whistled while he worked, and his boy rode a bicycle so fast it learned the curve of the road and kept taking it when the road turned into a path and the path turned into a trail and the trail turned into someone's memory of a trail. She smiled with one side of her face. I think you found where the whistling goes. That night, Ansel dreamed slow water and a boy's bell moving away just fast enough to be allowed. He woke before dawn with rain, finally practicing its lines on the roof. He left the boat on the trailer and took the road along the river to the dam because seeing the thing that made the change is sometimes a cure. The dam looked itself, muscle and worry. Men in hard hats wave the way men wave when their hands are busy with ladders and they still have manners. The sky had put its gray coat back on. The rain lasted 2 full days. The third day broke open into a light that could make a shuttered room reconsider. He took the skiff out at noon. The lake had risen a hand's width and drawn a green lip on the lower steps. He climbed again. The air steps remained, not drowned by a little more water, not meek. He stood on the third invisible tread and spoke toward the place where a door might be. Not loudly, not foolishly. Hello, he said. Then, because the air had made him braver than he ought to be, he added, I can bring your names back to where people can see them. The lake answered the way lakes answer, by being present with everything around them without offering comment. He sat on the 4th stone step and ate the pastry Lucienne had tucked into his pocket as if she had known he would forget to eat. He tried the air with his palm again and felt, for just a fraction of heart rhythm, a shape moved across it that was not his hand at all. The story traveled the way stories travel when they are useful. Not online, not yet. In town, over paper cups, in line at the post office, at the walk-in barber with the fish calendar 3 years behind. People gave him their versions. A woman who remembered a man who remembered seeing a parade of porches floating like rafts past the bend when the first flood came. An old man with a face like a woodcut who said he used to fish off a stone stair when his father was alive, and that if you whistled the tune that man used, you could make the bobber nod. A teacher who had kept a box of rail spikes and marbles found on low years and said she would clean them and bring them by the society office so Lucienne could have them or pretend not to want them like she always did. In late October, with 2 hard frosts behind them, the county asked Ansel to guide a ranger and a structural engineer to the site. They went out in a John boat that carried its own echo. The ranger was a woman named Haynes who wore the park's green like a promise and carried the weight of a radio the way people carry their father's ideas. The engineer was a man with a gentle way of touching old things before speaking ill of them. They stood on the fifth stone step and looked up the ladder of air and did not mock it. The ranger wrote in a book. The engineer crouched and set a level on the second tread and laughed once softly when the bubble centered itself as if the past knew about precision. Haynes asked the question, stories have to survive. Is it dangerous? Ansel shrugged in a way that held 3 chapters. It is dangerous the way memory is dangerous, he said. It makes people want to keep climbing. It is dangerous the way stairs are when you forget you have a body with limits. It is not dangerous the way an alligator is or a bar fight. They set 3 stakes in the bank and tied flagging ribbon between, a line that told people who had to approach that someone else had been wise before them. Haynes asked for a sign, the simple kind that reads caution and does not attempt poetry. Ansel offered to come and keep an eye some afternoons when he had work nearby. She wrote his cell number in her book and tucked the pencil behind her ear in a way his mother would have liked. In early November, a fog rolled in low and forgot to leave. The lake became a page erased and written over, erased again. School buses turned their lights on at noon. The mountain that wears the dam as a decoration hid its fine line. Ansel kept away because the fog makes men do things they forgive themselves for later, and a man ought to reduce his opportunities for forgiveness if he can. On the first clear morning after, he went out early and found 2 objects on the 4th stone step that could not have gotten there by falling. A bicycle bell, rusted but round, the striker frozen in a kind of kindness, and a tin pail, the exact wrong size for anything useful, dented where a boy might have clapped it to make the sound bigger. He touched neither. He sat down. He greeted them with his breath in line, the way you greet animals that have decided to be near you. At 10, Lucien arrived with a thermos and 2 paper cups and the sort of force field that keeps good men from doing dumb things for no reason. She looked at the bell and the pail and did not pretend not to see them. She took photos that did not flatter the light and said the names in the ledger once. Lowe, Garvey, Applin, Willow Gap. She did not say a boy. She did not say a child. She put her hand on the sidewall and looked up the line of air with the plain candor of someone who has shored up more shelves than emotions and understands both. You can coax a story, she said, but not yank it. Take the bell to town. Leave the pail here for another day. We will see what the lake thinks of compromise. He took the bell gently, wrapped it in a handkerchief he had never found much use for before, and pocketed it like a chosen stone. Back at the office, Lucien set it next to a photograph and a typed card. Bicycle bell recovered from Willow Gap Stair, fall of 22, likely pre-flood artifact. On the card, a second line in pencil for people who read too fast. The stair goes up. In the second week of December, with the mountains blue as a bruise and the wind deciding to be cruel to make up for lost time, Ansel went out one last day before the holidays. He brought a crowbar because he had promised himself he would not bring a crowbar until the story invited one. He did not need it. The pail had sat, then vanished, then returned, then sat again with a rock in it a little smaller than a fist. He took the rock out and saw in the bottom of the pail, scratched by some patient hand or the work of a nail held at an angle, 3 words. Open in summer. He laughed out loud then. So loudly, a pair of ducks took off in a panic and told other ducks about him for an hour. He looked up at the sky, which had forgotten him to tend to larger business. He put the pail back on the step. He told it, with what dignity he could muster, that he would. Winter happened the way winter happens down there. One day, the lake wore a shell of rime like a dare. The next day, it rained hard as coins. Ansel worked a road job in the next county and came home tired to soup and a radio with the news that would not stop wishing it were better. He sent Lucien postcards from 2 counties over with sketches of culverts no one needed, and she mailed him back photocopies of ledger pages with red pencil underlines that made more sense than his own arrows. By late June, the water had climbed enough to lick at the 3rd riser and cover the 1st. The air above the invisible steps still felt like fabric pulled tight by a careful hand. School let out, and visitors came with coolers and the need to float and forget. Haynes put the sign back up twice. Ansel sat on the eighth stone step more than once and told people kindly that there was nothing up there for them unless they had time to spare and patience to listen. A few listened, most did not. No one fell, which felt like a policy. On a hot Monday, when thunderheads built tall and polite to the south and forgot to arrive, he took the pail and set it in his lap and used the crowbar not as a pry, but as a weight. He eased the thin tin sides apart where they had been pinched back over the lip like a secret. Inside, he found folded oilcloth, soft as a worn glove. Inside that, a photograph no larger than his palm, and a strip of paper with a line that looked like a prayer until he read it, and it felt like a list. The photograph showed the stair as it had been before the lake, the woman in summer dress and the baby at her hip, and the boy with the pail, sitting with a seriousness that has no word in English. The man who must be M. Garvey stood 2 steps down, hat in hand, as if introducing the stairs to whoever had the camera. Behind them, the ridge wore its trees in a confidence the mountains teach. On the back, in careful letters, someone had written, "So you remember how we looked when the water was a rumor." The strip of paper held one long sentence. When they came with clipboards, he whistled the tune about willow leaves and said he'd build the stair to the sky because steps are a kind of truth, and the water would have to climb over the truth if it wanted to drown the house. There were names then, 3, the kind that drop out of families and get picked up by strangers who treat them right. He folded the strip back into the oilcloth and put all of it into the pail and set it on the step, because the story belonged to the stair more than it belonged to him. In August, a lightning storm chewed on the dam and left it as it had found it. In September, a girl with a blue braid and a polka dot dress climbed the real stone steps and stood at the place where air did its work and played a penny whistle softly, 3 notes, and then a run. Her grandmother sat on the second step and wiped her cheeks with a tissue she pretended was for sweat. Lucienne watched from the bank with a composure she had purchased fairly over years of deciding when to speak and when to file. Haynes wrote a note in her book that read in an unsentimental hand, "Leave space here." The last time Ansel went before the rains came back for real, he climbed onto the 3rd invisible tread and set his palm out at the height of a child's head. He did not feel breath. He felt pressure. A small, exact pressure like the world confirming a measurement you would have sworn was off by just enough to drive you mad. He closed his eyes and saw the boy on the landing with the pail and the bell. He saw a woman take the last 2 steps at a practical pace, baby on hip. He saw a man look out at a hillside that had just become a lake and refuse to let the stair be anything but stairs. He opened his eyes, and the lake went on being a lake. There is not a larger lesson he can give you from this, except the one he wrote in the margin of his notebook after the 2nd week, a sentence he did not quite understand then and understands in the small of his back now. Not everything drowned. Some things learn to keep their shape in the air and wait for your foot. If you go to Fontana when the water is down and the wind minds its manners, you can find the stair if you ask the right person and you promise not to hurry. It will be there the way durable things are there, honest about their age, unwilling to entertain your stunts. You can put your boot on the 3rd step and feel something that does not owe you an explanation hold you anyway. You can look up at the sky and decide there is a door or decide there isn't, and the stair will permit either decision. You can listen for a bicycle bell and you may hear a loon instead, and that will be enough. If you tell the story afterward, tell it the way lakes prefer, with pauses, with dates spoken out loud so the years remember they are not just numbers, with names because names weigh the right things down. Say Willow Gap, say Garvey, say Applin, say a boy, though the paper does not give him to you. Say a woman moving with a baby on her hip and a list in her head and a refusal to shame the stairs with panic. Say a man who whistled a leaf tune and believed in steps the way people believe in scripture, not as decoration, but as an instruction on how to move the body when the body wants to quit. And if you find yourself on a day when the wind drops and the water stills, and you are offered the choice to test a step that does not belong to stone, ask your breath first. Make it even. Set your palm where a rail would be. Put your weight down like a promise. If it holds, climb one and stop. The air prefers people who do not need to conquer it to feel tall. Leave something small on the fifth step. A ribbon, a marble, a bell that waited in a drawer too long. Walk back down and let the day close the drawer. The stair will keep going up whether you are there to witness the miracle of plain persistence or not. That is how some things survived the flood. They decide to be their own house. They decide to be the part of the house you cannot drown.